The morning the HOA padlocked my gate, the mist came early, a low, silver fog rolling through the pines like it knew something I didn't. I stood on the porch of my cabin with a mug of black coffee, watching it swallow the dirt road that wound down toward the valley. The only sound was the creek beyond the trees, swollen with meltwater, whispering like it carried gossip from the mountains. My name's Daniel Price, and for 15 years this stretch of land was my refuge, 20 acres at the edge of Briar Ridge, a half-forgotten development where retirees and weekenders built expensive homes and called it nature. When I first moved here, there was no HOA, no board meetings, no rules about what color your porch light had to be. Just trees, quiet, and the old mining road that cut through my property, the only road leading in or out of the ridge. That road was my lifeline. And, technically, it was also mine. The deed said so. The old plats confirmed it. I owned the land the road sat on, grandfathered in from a purchase my father made before the development even existed. But over time, as the town grew and the HOA formed to protect community standards, they started acting like it was theirs. Maintenance fees. Access complaints. Demands that I keep it open for association traffic. And for a long while, I did. Until last winter. That's when they decided my unapproved structure, a new tool shed, 15 feet from my cabin, violated code. They fined me, ordered me to tear it down. I ignored them. They sent letters, then a lien notice. Then came Linda Mathers, HOA president, wearing pearls and a Patagonia vest, standing on my porch like she owned the place. Daniel, she'd said with that brittle smile, we just want cooperation. The board has to maintain uniformity. It's what keeps our property values strong. I told her I didn't give a damn about their property values. That was 6 weeks ago. Now, my gate, a simple cedar beam and chain setup, was sealed shut with a bright orange padlock, stamped Briar Ridge HOA. At first, I thought it was a prank. But when I drove my truck down to check, there was a metal sign zip-tied to the post. Private road, HOA access only. Trespassers will be reported. I just stood there, the engine idling, rain starting to spit through the trees. The lot glinted like an accusation. That's when the first neighbor appeared, Rick Hanley, one of the board members. Retired dentist. The kind of man who still wore boat shoes in the mountains. He waved from across the fence line. Morning, Dan. HOA voted last night. Temporary restriction. You'll get an email. Temporary restriction? I shouted over the rain. You locked me in. Just till we sort things out. Liability issue. You'll understand. He disappeared back into the mist before I could say another word. By afternoon, my phone had no signal. The HOA loved to optimize coverage, which somehow always meant worse reception on my end. I tried emailing their office, no response. Tried calling the county clerk, voicemail. By sundown, I realized something worse. They'd sent an official notice taped to my mailbox, back at the gate. Notice of access revocation. Effective immediately, due to unresolved compliance and maintenance disputes, Briar Ridge HOA will restrict access along the communal roadway pending arbitration. Alternate ingress/egress must be coordinated via HOA management. Except there was no alternate ingress. The creek on one side was too deep, the ridge too steep. The road they'd sealed was the only way out, and they knew it. I could have broken the lock. Hell, I almost did. But something in me hesitated. The road was my property, yes, but if I cut that lock, they'd twist it into trespass, maybe even vandalism. They wanted that fight on paper, not on principle. So instead, I waited. The next day, a white SUV with the HOA logo rolled up to the outer side of the gate. Out stepped Evan Cole, the association's compliance officer. Mid-30s, always grinning like he practiced in the mirror. Mr. Price, he called out, clipboard in hand. We're conducting a temporary access audit. You've been notified. You locked me in my own damn land, I said. That's not an audit. He smirked. Technically, this is common property. Read the deed, I snapped. Page 4, Section C. The road's part of my parcel. Your fancy maps don't change that. Evan didn't argue. He just took a photo of me through the bars of the gate like I was some zoo exhibit and got back in his SUV. That night, I heard trucks up on the ridge. Engines. Voices. Metal clanging. When I went out with a flashlight, I saw them through the trees, workers installing a second gate up the road, cutting off access from the main highway. They were sealing Briar Ridge from both ends. And that's when I realized, it wasn't just about me anymore. They were closing the community in. 3 days passed. The fog grew heavier. My generator sputtered, low on fuel. I hiked down to the gate again, scanning for any gap in the fence line, but they'd reinforced it with steel mesh. Even the ditch by the creek was blocked with a new culvert gate. Then, footsteps. A figure moved through the mist on the other side, Sarah Klein, a schoolteacher who lived up the ridge. Her face was pale, drawn tight with worry. "Daniel," she whispered, clutching the bars, "you have to come to the meeting tonight." "Something's wrong." "What kind of wrong?" "They say the HOA's negotiating with a private company. Selling the access rights. Everyone's panicking. They think you're the holdout." I felt the words like cold water down my back. The road wasn't just a control tactic. It was leverage. Whoever owned it controlled every home, every family up there. And if they could strip me of title or prove I'd abandoned maintenance, they could sell it to whoever they damn pleased. Sarah looked back over her shoulder. "They're scared of you, Daniel. But they won't let you in without permission." "I don't need permission," I said quietly. "I own the way out." She hesitated, then slipped me a folded paper through the gate, a copy of the HOA's new development proposal. I unfolded it and stared at the letterhead. Briar Ridge Development Expansion. Proposed by Cole Property Group. Pending acquisition of through road access rights. Evan Cole. The compliance officer. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a takeover. Sarah's eyes darted nervously toward the fog. "Be careful," she said. "They're not just enforcing rules anymore." Then she vanished back up the road. That night, I lit the old kerosene lamp and spread the documents across my table. Deed. Maps. Letters. Their notices. All the evidence I'd need if I could get out. Outside, the rain started again. The creek roared like it was alive, and the wind slammed against the cabin walls. Somewhere down the ridge, I heard a generator kick on and then, faintly, the grinding whine of metal on metal. When I went out with my flashlight, I saw sparks flashing through the fog. They were cutting something. The gate. And not from the outside, from my side. Someone was already inside the fence. The first thing I noticed wasn't the sound, it was the smell. Hot metal. Burned paint. That sick, electrical tang that doesn't belong in the woods. I stepped off the porch, rain slicking my jacket, flashlight slicing through the fog. The beam caught nothing but shifting white until I saw it. A faint orange spark, halfway down the road. Then another. Someone was cutting through the gate from my side. I moved quietly, boots sinking into the mud, breath visible in the cold. The sound came and went in quick bursts, like a grinder or battery-powered saw. As I drew closer, the fog peeled back just enough for me to see a shape, a man in a poncho, hunched by the cedar posts, sparks lighting his face in quick flashes. He wasn't one of the neighbors. "Hey!" I shouted. The man froze. The grinder's whine died, leaving only the rain. Then, without a word, he bolted, sprinting toward the creek. I ran after him, slipping in the mud, flashlight beam bouncing across the trees. I heard him crash through brush, boots pounding toward the drainage culvert at the edge of the fence. He knew exactly where he was going. By the time I reached the creek, he was gone, nothing but a few boot prints and the hiss of water on hot metal where he dropped the grinder. I picked it up. The label had been scraped off, but the initials EC were scratched into the casing with a knife. Evan Cole. That snake was trespassing on my property. And not to enforce anything, but to sabotage. I knelt by the gate, shining the flashlight on the cut. He hadn't been trying to break in, he was cutting the hinges loose, making the gate look damaged, maybe to justify emergency removal. A setup. I went back to the cabin soaked and shaking, part fury, part adrenaline. The power was flickering from the storm, but I pulled out my camera, took photos of the damage, of the grinder, of the cut posts. Evidence. But I couldn't shake the thought, what if I hadn't woken up? What if I hadn't heard him? Would they have come in before sunrise and finished the job? By morning, the rain had turned to sleet. My satellite internet was dead. The creek had risen another 2 feet too high to cross without getting swept. The ridge felt sealed now, like a prison. I spent the day patching the gate with steel brackets, welding over the half-cut hinge with my old portable torch. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. When I looked up from the work, I saw a vehicle idling beyond the fence again. A black pickup. Windows tinted. It didn't move. I watched it for nearly an hour. Then, just as I decided to walk closer, it backed up the hill and vanished into the fog. That night, a soft knock hit my cabin door 3 times, quick and nervous. It was Sarah Klein again, soaked and pale. She pushed inside before I could say a word, clutching a wet folder against her chest. "They're saying you vandalized the gate," she said breathlessly. "Evan showed photos at the meeting. He said he caught you cutting it open." "Of course he did," I muttered. "Did he happen to mention leaving his tool behind with his initials carved in it?" She looked startled. "You have proof?" I handed her the grinder. "Right here." Her eyes darted to the window, to the dark beyond it. "Daniel, you don't understand. They're not just trying to fine you anymore. They voted tonight to petition the county for eminent domain. They're claiming the road's a public necessity. They want to seize it." I felt something cold settle in my chest. If the county approved that petition, the road would become common property and I'd lose control forever. "When's the hearing?" I asked. "Friday morning." 2 days. "And where?" "Town Hall, Ridgway County." "But they don't expect you to show. Evan said you were non-compliant and unreachable." I almost laughed. "Unreachable, huh? They sealed me in." Sarah's voice dropped. "Daniel, they don't want you there. If you show up, they'll spin it. They'll say you're unstable." I stared out through the rain-blurred glass. The forest was a wall of shadows and sound. "Then I'll give them something real to spin." That night, I barely slept. The wind howled down the ridge, shaking the eaves. I kept thinking about that pickup, about Evan sneaking onto my land. If they wanted to control the road, they'd need a way to prove I'd abandoned it, or worse, that it was unsafe. Maybe they planned to make it that way. At around 2 a.m., I heard movement again. This time, from the back of the property. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and stepped outside. The air was freezing, fog pooling low between the trees. My boots sank into soft mud as I followed the sound, a slow, rhythmic clank of metal. Then I saw the lights. 4 of them. Small beams, moving through the trees. Voices, muffled. I crouched behind a stump, breath fogging, and listened. "Clear it out by morning. Get the posts down, make it look storm damage. Cole said Price won't notice till daylight." They weren't working on the gate this time. They were digging up my survey markers, the iron stakes that defined my property line. I gripped the rifle tighter, not to use it, but to remind myself I could. I waited until one of them stepped closer, his flashlight sweeping low over the mud. His jacket had the HOA logo, but I recognized the face, Rick Hanley. The same smug retiree who'd waved from his yard. I stepped out of the fog. "You boys lost?" The 4 men froze. The nearest dropped his shovel. "Daniel," Rick started, hands up, "we're just checking the drainage." "On my land? At 2 in the morning?" Evan's voice came from behind him. "You're obstructing official business, Mr. Price. The HOA has authority to inspect shared easements." There's nothing shared about this, I said, stepping closer, flashlight in his face. You want to inspect something? Inspect your own damn lies. Evan smirked, that same mirror-perfect grin. Careful, Daniel. Threatening HOA representatives could be considered harassment. I'm not threatening, I said quietly. I'm recording. I raised my phone, the camera light blinking red. His smirk faltered. You're trespassing, I said. For witnesses, on video, destroying boundary markers. That's property damage. Want to keep talking? Evan hesitated, then snapped his fingers. Pack it up. We'll file this officially. They left in silence, their lights fading into the fog. At dawn, I uploaded everything I could to a thumb drive, photos, video, copies of deeds, and sealed it in a waterproof bag. The county hearing was in 48 hours, and I'd need to be there in person. But there was still the gate. The lock. The flooded creek. The fence. And I knew one thing for sure, the HOA wasn't going to let me leave. That's when I remembered the old mining tunnel, a collapsed shaft that cut under the ridge, barely half a mile north. My father had sealed it decades ago, but if I could clear part of it, it might connect to the service road beyond the HOA barrier. It would be dangerous. But it was my only way out. I packed my gear, flashlight, rope, crowbar, old helmet. Sarah had offered to help, but I told her no. If things went wrong, I didn't want her caught in the crossfire. The fog was thicker than ever as I hiked through the pines. Every step felt heavy, each gust of wind carrying whispers from somewhere unseen. When I reached the rock face where the tunnel mouth used to be, I found the entrance half collapsed, just like I remembered, but not sealed. Someone had been here. Recently. Fresh footprints led straight inside. I crouched at the edge, listening. Faint echoes, metallic and hollow. A beam of light flickered deep within, not mine. And then, a voice. Low, male, familiar. Evan Cole. Make sure it looks natural. Collapse it before he finds out. I felt the ground tremble slightly beneath me as they worked explosives, by the sound of it. They weren't just trying to seal me in anymore. They were going to bury the way out. The sound of shovels echoed through the tunnel like the heartbeat of something dying. Every strike of metal on rock carried through the hollow air, dull, deliberate, urgent. I crouched just outside the entrance, rain dripping off my jacket, heart pounding in my throat. The fog clung to the ridge behind me, muffling the forest into silence. Somewhere inside that tunnel, Evan Cole and his crew were rigging charges to collapse it, to bury the last route out of Briar Ridge. My father's old mining road, our road, was about to disappear for good. I checked the flashlight, its beam thin and trembling, then slipped inside. The air grew colder instantly. Damp earth, rot, rust. The walls were tight, carved decades ago, held up by half-rotten timbers. My boots sank into black mud. Every sound I made echoed twice, once from ahead, once from behind, like something whispering in answer. I moved slow, careful. The deeper I went, the clearer the voices became. Cole, this line's ready, someone said, muffled, about 50 yards ahead. A pause. Then Evan's voice, low and sharp. We detonate, it seals the tunnel from both sides. Price'll have nowhere to go. The board's signing off tomorrow. He can't stop it if he can't leave. My blood went cold. I took another step, a board snapped underfoot. The sound cracked through the tunnel like a gunshot. Hold up, someone barked. You hear that? Flashlight swung. I dropped to the ground, crawling behind an old rusted cart, heart hammering so hard I could taste metal. Evan's boots squelched through the mud as he walked closer. His light swept across the tunnel walls, the ceiling, then paused inches from the cart where I hid. He waited. Listening. And for a moment, I thought he'd hear my breath. Then one of the workers called out, probably rats, man. This place is falling apart. Evan grunted. Fine. Set the last charge. We're almost done. I waited until they turned back toward the end of the shaft, then crawled out, every muscle tight with adrenaline. My hand brushed the detonation wire, fresh, orange-coated, leading to a battery pack near the entrance. If they set those off, the blast would bring down half the ridge. I followed the wire toward the center of the tunnel, where they'd stacked bags of ammonium nitrate under a sagging timber. One shove, one spark, and this place would be gone. I had two options: stop them quietly, or make sure they couldn't deny what they'd done. I pulled my phone out, set it to record. The dim red light blinked in the dark. "Evan," one worker said nervously, "you sure this is legal?" Evan's laugh echoed against the stone. "Legal? It's strategic. Once this land's condemned, Cole Property Group takes over road development. The HOA gets a payout, the board gets bonuses, and Price. He kicked a loose rock down the shaft. Price gets to stay right where he belongs." That was all I needed. I stepped into the light, voice steady. "You always this talkative before committing a felony, Evan?" The workers jumped back, startled. Evan's head snapped toward me, eyes wide, then narrowing to fury. "Price. What the hell are you?" "Recording," I said. "You just confessed to land fraud, illegal demolition, and trespass. Congratulations, you're the HOA's new PR disaster." Evan's jaw clenched. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're a paranoid hermit in a shack. I've got the county, the board, and the sheriff eating out of my hand." He reached for the detonator on his vest. "Don't," I warned, stepping forward. "You set that off, you'll kill us all." "Maybe," he said, smirking. "But no one'll find you under 2 tons of rock." He thumbed the switch. The explosion hit like a god's heartbeat. A flash, blinding white, tore through the tunnel. The ground surged under me, and the world went to sound and dust. I was thrown backward into the mud, ears ringing, lungs burning with grit. The timbers cracked and fell like dying trees. When I came to, half the tunnel was gone. The air was thick with smoke and powdered stone. My flashlight was shattered, but a faint beam from deeper inside still flickered emergency lamp. The workers were gone. Buried, maybe fled. But Evan wasn't. I heard him groan somewhere up the slope. I crawled toward the sound, dragging myself through rubble and dust until I found him pinned under a beam, coughing blood, eyes wild. You ruined everything," he wheezed. "That road was worth millions." "You sealed your own grave," I said. He laughed, ragged, bitter. "You think this changes anything? The HOA'll bury you in paperwork even if the mountain doesn't." "Maybe," I said, pulling the phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked, but the red light still blinked. "Still recording." I leaned close so he could see it. "But now, everyone's going to hear your voice doing it." His face went pale. He tried to reach for it, but his arm gave out. I pushed the beam off him, stood, and started back toward the faint hint of daylight that filtered from the far end, a collapsed wall with a gap just big enough to crawl through. Behind me, Evan shouted, "You won't make it out." But I did. Outside, the world was chaos. The blast had shaken loose half the slope, trees had fallen across the creek, water rushing around them. My lungs screamed, but I kept moving down the ridge, across the flooded banks, toward the old fence line. The HOA's upper gate, the one they'd installed to block the highway, was twisted now, one post blown loose from the shockwave. I dragged myself through the mud, under the bent rail, and fell onto asphalt. Free! Rain hammered down. Sirens wailed somewhere far below: fire, rescue, maybe the sheriff. I didn't wait to find out. I got into my truck, the same one that hadn't moved in a week, and started the engine. It coughed once, then roared to life. I drove. By the time I reached Ridgway County offices, it was nearly dawn. The clerk looked at me like I was a ghost, covered in soot, bleeding from a cut on my forehead. "I need to file an emergency injunction," I said hoarsely, slapping the thumb drive onto the counter. "Evidence of criminal activity by Briar Ridge HOA and Cole Property Group." The clerk hesitated, then saw the recorder light still blinking. "You have proof?" "Plenty," I said. She took the drive with trembling hands. The next 48 hours were a blur: deputies, interviews, federal calls. By the weekend, the county sheriff had cordoned off the entire ridge. The HOA office was sealed, and Evan Cole was under investigation for fraud, racketeering, and attempted manslaughter. The news called it the Briar Ridge Scandal. Neighbors called it justice. For me, it was just quiet again. A week later, I stood by the rebuilt gate. No locks this time. Just the old cedar beam, mended and sanded smooth. The fog rolled down the ridge again, soft and silver. Sarah pulled up in her SUV, window rolling down. "You really did it," she said. "County ruled the road's yours outright. They dissolved the HOA this morning." I nodded. "About time." She smiled faintly. "What will you do now?" "Same as before," I said. "Live quiet. Keep it open for the folks who respect it." Her gaze softened. "Not everyone would have fought back. Not everyone's got something worth fighting for." She looked past me, toward the cabin through the trees. "You ever think about leaving?" I looked at the road, the mountains, the mist drifting through the pines. "Once," I said. "Then they reminded me why I stay." She nodded, then drove off slow, gravel crunching under her tires. As the sound faded, I walked back to the porch. The air smelled clean pine, rain, wood smoke. The way it used to. The road stretched out before me, cutting through the fog like a scar, a reminder and a promise all at once. They'd sealed me in, thinking they could take control. But they forgot the oldest rule of land and law. You can't cage the man who owns the way out.